I am the most selfish and cruel person I know, so go ahead and roast me however you want. My ex and I were together for about 2 years. We met at a mutual friend's party. At that point, he lived and worked in another city about 3 hours away. We started talking and went on dates on weekends. He would drive to me almost every weekend to see me. After about 3 months, he asked me to be his girlfriend. He made it clear that he wanted a monogamous relationship. I said yes. About 6, 7 months after that, he wanted to find a job in my area and move closer. We were both really happy at that moment. But after almost a year after a couple of interviews, he couldn't land a good paying job that he wanted and would end up making much less if he moved. We had our ups and downs, but he still visited me every weekend and holidays. I felt like I started losing my feelings for him. One night, I installed dating apps and started chatting with some people. He found out when his friend sent a screenshot of my dating profile to him. He confronted me over the phone. I apologized. He asked me why I did that. I made excuses, but in the end, I said I didn't want to continue the relationship. He begged me to stay and we could start over. I told him I didn't have feelings for him anymore and I don't believe we could rebuild the relationship. He kept texting me after that. I blocked him on social media, but I still read his SMS. He texted me nonstop the first couple of days begging me to give him a second chance so that he could make me love him again. He stopped texting me the following week. The week after that, he started texting me again, saying how he could do differently in the relationship. The week after that, he often sent angry text messages and then apologized the next day. I didn't reply to any of his messages. After that, he said how he just wished me to be happy and just wanted to be the one that makes that happen. In the second month, he started telling me how he missed me, how his life was going, and how he was anxious and afraid of going to sleep because of his nightmares. In the following weeks, he kept repeating those and told me how he hated himself for being like that and how much he wanted it to be over. I didn't reply to any of that. After that, everything stopped. I thought he was over it and everything is good now. About 2 weeks later, which was at the end of January this year, his friend texted me on Instagram and delivered the news. Only then did I really start thinking and see how bad of a person I was. Now I know that I am truly a selfish person. I didn't have a bit of self-control. I craved attention. I never really cared about hurting others' feelings. I always told myself that fewer words are better when ending a relationship and I should be firm about it. But now I think I was just being cruel. I never cared enough to put more words and effort into making him feel better. I always thought a 2-year long-distance relationship wasn't something that he should fight for like that. Even after many hints in the last couple of weeks, I couldn't care less to think that he would do something like that. This guilt is eating me alive, and I feel like I deserve it. All right, that's a wrap. I love hearing your thoughts, so smash that like, drop a comment, and let's keep the vibes rolling. Well, as they say, one drama ends, another begins. Once upon a time, my grandma died, marking the high point of the worst night of my life. I was at uni at the time, and it was late one evening that I received the call I had been dreading for weeks. My grandma had mentally never faltered over the years, a solid rock of intelligence that had slowly become bound to her chair as she and I got older, so her death shocked me in a way nothing else really ever has. I felt like I'd come adrift from reality, that a fundamental law of the universe had been broken. After all, she'd always been there. It didn't make sense for her to die, and as such sought solstice in my friends, and just as importantly, the alcohol my friends possessed. Small note, I was in Scotland and received the call around 10:30 p.m. Scotland prohibits off-license alcohol sales between 10 p.m. and 10 a.m., so I couldn't just get some from the shop. I went round to said friends, a group of girls whose flat I often crashed at after parties, where we talked and drank and watched some Pokémon, and they gradually drifted off to bed until it was just me and a girl we'll call H only a few weeks before H's crush on me had been discovered. So between the alcohol lowering our inhibitions and our intent to keep me distracted from my grandma's death, we found ourselves helping each other undress in her bedroom. For whatever reason, we decided to skip the condom and go straight to the fun bit, despite her having a shoebox half full of condoms as I found out later. But this time something was wrong. As soon as it, and by it, I mean my dick, went and I felt pain, like something had torn through the skin, and when I stopped H and pulled it out, we discovered blood everywhere and an 1.5 inch long tear in my foreskin. Note, this wasn't the frenulum, banjo string that snapped, which many men suffer at some point, with or without frenulum breve, but an actual tear in the side of my foreskin. I immediately responded to the situation, as any sensible person would, by going into shock and then dry heaving. H responded by panicking about how to get me to hospital without letting her roommates know I tore my dick while we were having sex, not just because of how embarrassing the situation was already, but also because she had a boyfriend who was currently in Ireland. Once I'd pulled myself together and got dressed, so I didn't have to look at the poor mutilated abomination that had until recently been my pride and various girls' joy, I suggested we tell them I had nearly fainted and started throwing up truish. And while we thought it was just the shock of my grandma's death hitting me, not true. We were going to run down to the hospital to check it out, true, but referring to a different it. Thankfully, they bought it, or if they didn't, they haven't brought it up since, and we made our escape. Out the front door, we stepped to find the weather had decided to match my misery with pouring rain and gale force winds. We ran round the corner, into the car, and set off for the hospital. Some of you will be familiar with Edinburgh, so when I say we were going to A and E from Slateford, will immediately know our route of choice, Edinburgh bypass. For those unfamiliar, the bypass is a dual carriageway that more or less encircles Edinburgh, and like any motorway in the UK, is fairly inaccessible on foot, a point of significance that should let you make a guess as to where this is going. Sure enough, about a mile along the bypass, we hear a clunk and start to decelerate. H's car was around 15 years old and fully expected to break down completely within the next year, but having it happen at such an inconvenient time was, well, incredibly inconvenient. Luckily, this being the age of mobile phones, we could call H's roommates, explain that the car had broken down, and get a number for a taxi firm from them. The taxi company, however, refused to pick us up, saying that we were about a mile down from the A71 junction westbound wasn't precise enough for it to be worth them sending a taxi out, apparently. I can only suppose they, and the company we called after them, didn't trust their drivers to find the only broken-down car, and probably only car, period, on the bypass. We, however, were growing increasingly cold, what with it being the middle of the night, in Scotland, in late autumn, during a storm, and so were relieved when the third company agreed to send a car out with only a small amount of pleading. After a shortish wait, the taxi arrived and whisked us away to our salvation, A and E. Upon entering A and E, we found it to be surprisingly devoid of drunks for the middle of the night, and so H went off to call the police and report her car so it could be collected, and I went up to the front desk, where I had to tell two very professional middle-aged ladies my full name and date of birth, that I'd torn my foreskin having sex, and that no, I wasn't using protection when it happened. They handed me a printed sheet of paper, told me to go through some double doors and to hand the paper to the first nurse I encountered. I went through the doors, saw lots of people in color-coded scrubs, and not having a clue what they meant, walked up to someone who didn't look too busy and asked if they were a nurse. "No," he replied, taking the paper, "but I'll take a gander for you." On seeing the actual contents of the paper, a look of horror crossed his face, a slight widening of the eyes and drop of the corners of his mouth. Doctors and nurses everywhere, please make sure your poker face is better than his was, because knowing your injuries freak out medical professionals does not inspire the slightest bit of confidence. I'm not sure if this needs an examination or not," he managed to say, which was obviously overheard when a Landwell of a matron snatched it out of his hands with a "gimme a look. I'll tell you if it needs examining." The Landwell had no sympathy at all. Again, doctors and nurses, don't be this either. You may have seen something 1,000 times before, but that doesn't make it any less bad for the patient. But did tell me it would need an examination, and offered me the choice of a male or female doctor to look at it. As I wanted even a slight shred of sympathy, I opted for the male doctor, and shortly after was pulling my trousers down for a young man who was very carefully trying to not show any emotion. Credit to him, on seeing the damage he only winced a little bit. Quick bio lesson. Dicks are mostly made up of spongy white tissue that expands when filled with blood, So when you tear a hole in the side, it looks infected and pussy, a lot worse than it actually is, and informed me that it would heal on its own, but to wash it 3-4 times a day and not engage in any form of sexual activity for the next 2 weeks. He left, I dressed, and while walking out saw a gaggle of male and female doctors talking to the one who had just seen me. The women were giggling like 12-year-old girls, and the men had a variety of pained and horrified expressions. I walked out of there knowing that I had provided a story that would entertain and horrify the hospital for at least a week, and that was without any of the backstory. I also walked out pretty much as I had entered, in a significant amount of discomfort. So after finding H, we immediately jumped in a taxi and went to our respective homes so I could metaphorically lick my wound until it had healed enough for her to literally lick it. Epilogue: 2 weeks later, everything had healed and was fully functioning bar a new centimeter or so scar on Lil Dickus Rippus. I celebrated by successfully having sex with H, and then going back to sleeping around as usual. Ever since that night, when I'm out with friends and one of them starts whinging about how their day has just been the worst, I'm on hand to say, once upon a time, my grandma died, marking the high point of the worst night of my life. People tend to stop whinging pretty quickly.